The rain hammered Boston's industrial district like bullets against sheet metal, each drop a percussion note in October's cold symphony. Inside Brennan's auto repair, the sound was muffled by 4 decades of oil-stained brick and the steady hum of fluorescent lights that had witnessed more breakdowns than resurrections. Nathaniel Brennan Nash, to anyone who'd earned the right, knelt beside a 1985 Ford F-150, his calloused hands tracing the fuel line with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a saint. 58 years had etched lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting at engine blocks under harsh sun, of late nights chasing electrical gremlins, of a life spent translating the language of machines for people who'd long stopped listening to anything mechanical. The truck belonged to Jimmy Patterson, a construction foreman 3 months behind on rent, who needed this beast running by Monday, or he'd lose the job that barely kept his family fed. Nash had quoted him $200 for parts and labor. Jimmy had counted out $140 in crumpled bills and a handful of quarters, his pride cracking at the edges. Nash had taken it without comment, knowing he'd eat the difference because some things mattered more than profit margins. His father, dead 15 years now from the same heart disease that stalked Nash's own family tree, had built this garage on a simple philosophy fix: what's broken charge, what's fair, sleep sound. Nash had inherited the building, the tools, and that unshakable moral compass that felt increasingly outdated in a world that measured everything in shareholder value. The shop smelled like every automotive repair facility across America: motor oil and brake fluid, and the ghost of 1,000 cigarettes smoked by mechanics long retired or dead. Vintage tools hung on pegboards with military precision, each wrench and socket exactly where Nash's father had mounted them in 1984. Racing photos covered one wall: Nash in his 20s wearing NASCAR pit crew colors, frozen mid-motion during a tire change that had helped win Daytona in '92. Another photo showed his father standing beside a cherry-red '67 Mustang, hands on hips, that particular brand of working-class pride that came from building something real with your own 2 hands. Nash kept these images not from nostalgia, but as evidence proof that excellence existed outside boardrooms and corner offices, that skill was a currency that couldn't be devalued by market trends or corporate restructuring. In the corner, tucked behind a stack of tire balancers, Lily Brennan sat at her makeshift homework station. 12 years old, with her grandmother's dark hair and her mother's delicate features, she hunched over a math worksheet with the focused intensity of someone twice her age. The portable heart monitor strapped to her chest beeped its steady rhythm, a sound Nash heard in his sleep, in his nightmares, in every quiet moment when his mind wasn't disciplined enough to stay in the present. The monitor's LED display showed numbers he'd memorized like prayer. Heart rate 72, oxygen saturation 94%, both within acceptable ranges, but always teetering on the edge of acceptable, becoming critical. Dilated cardiomyopathy, the doctors called it. A fancy term for a heart that didn't pump right, that struggled with every beat, that was slowly failing despite the cocktail of medications she swallowed 3 times daily. Lily looked up from her homework, catching Nash's eye. "Grandpa, I wrote 2 good things today." Nash straightened, feeling his knees protest the movement. 2 years ago, he could kneel for hours without consequence. Now his body kept score of every position held too long, every heavy engine block lifted without proper form. "Only 2. We usually aim for 3, kiddo." "I'm tired." Her voice carried that particular flatness that set off alarm bells in Nash's chest. "My chest hurts a little." He was across the garage in 4 strides, years of emergency response overriding the knee pain and the tightness in his lower back that never quite went away anymore. Pulled a stool beside her workbench, settled onto it with what he hoped looked like casual ease rather than the concern flooding his nervous system. "Okay, baby, 2 is perfect. Tell me what you've got." She consulted her journal, a purple notebook with a unicorn on the cover that was too young for her, but that she'd picked out herself at the hospital gift shop during her last admission. Dr. Wells had suggested the practice: write down 3 good things every day, train your brain to look for light, instead of dwelling in the shadows of chronic illness. Lily had embraced it with the seriousness she brought to everything approaching her own mortality, with more grace than most adults managed in their entire lives. Number 1. Mr. Henderson let me be hamster monitor this week even though I missed school last Thursday for my appointment. She read carefully, pronouncing each word with deliberation. Number 2. You made pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse this morning. Nash felt something crack behind his ribs. The pancakes had been slightly burned. The Mickey ears uneven made in the pre-dawn darkness while Lily still slept, because he knew she'd need something cheerful to start her day. She'd eaten them without complaint, had even complimented the ears, and he'd thought maybe she hadn't noticed they were his clumsy attempt at making life seem normal when normal had stopped being an option 2 years ago. 2 years since Jack Nash's younger brother, the reckless one, the charmer who'd married young and fast and lived like he had extra time to burn, had wrapped his Nissan around a telephone pole on Route 128. Jack and Sarah both gone in an instant, airbags that didn't deploy fast enough impact forces that even the best engineering couldn't absorb. Lily had been at a sleepover, had woken up an orphan, had moved into Nash's spare bedroom with a duffel bag of clothes and a stuffed elephant named Mr. Patches, and a heart condition inherited from Sarah's side of the family. The condition that doctors had monitored in Sarah, that had been labeled manageable, that had killed her daughter's parents anyway, and was now stalking Lily with methodical patience. Nash had called Jack that night, the night of the accident, from this very garage. Jack had mentioned the brakes felt spongy, asked if Nash could take a look when he dropped Lily off Sunday. Nash had said, sure, Sunday's fine, bring it by after breakfast. If he'd said, come now, drive straight here, park it and take my truck home. If he'd trusted his brother's instincts instead of assuming Sunday was soon enough, Jack and Sarah would still be breathing. That guilt lived in Nash's chest like a tumor inoperable, and metastasizing, a constant reminder that even master mechanics couldn't fix everything. The front door chimed a bell Nash's father had installed that hadn't been replaced because some things didn't need improvement. Nash looked up, expecting Jimmy Patterson coming to check on the F-150's progress. Instead, he saw a woman who didn't belong in his world the way Ferraris didn't belong in demolition derbies. She stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nash's monthly revenue. Louboutin heels clicking against oil-stained concrete with the aggressive precision of someone accustomed to making entrances. Hair pulled back in a severe bun that suggested control bordering on compulsion. Face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't arranged in an expression that evaluated his garage the way health inspectors evaluated failing restaurants. Mid-40s Nash guessed, though money and good genetics made age harder to read. She carried herself with the particular posture of people who'd never been told no, who'd built fortresses of success so high they'd forgotten what the view looked like from ground level. Behind her, visible through the rain-streaked window, sat a 1967 Shelby GT 500 Eleanor on a flatbed tow truck. Midnight blue paint chrome that caught the weak October light like captured lightning. The kind of muscle car that made grown men weep and teenage boys pledge their futures to automotive worship. Nash had seen exactly 3 Eleanor Shelbys in his career. One had been in a private collection in Connecticut, another at a Barrett-Jackson auction where it sold for $2.1 million, the third in a magazine spread about automotive investment portfolios. None of them had ever darkened his garage door. The woman surveyed the space with visible distaste, cataloging every outdated piece of equipment, every oil stain, every indication that this establishment hadn't updated its business model since Reagan's first term. Her gaze landed on Nash, still kneeling beside the F-150 grease under his fingernails work shirt, with his name embroidered over the pocket in thread that had faded from royal blue to something approaching gray, and he watched her make instant calculations about his competence based solely on his zip code and tax bracket. "I need immediate service." Her voice carried the crisp enunciation of expensive boarding schools and Ivy League debate teams. Not rude exactly, but absolutely certain that the universe existed to facilitate her requirements. "My vehicle's engine has completely failed. I need it operational by sunset." Nash didn't move from his position beside the Ford, didn't acknowledge her with so much as a nod, just continued tracing the fuel-lined fingers, searching for the microscopic leak that was Jimmy Patterson's current crisis. He'd learned decades ago that people who started conversations with demands rarely improved with engagement. "Excuse me." Volume increased, impatience bleeding through the professional veneer. "I'm speaking to you. Are you deaf?" Still, Nash remained silent, focused on the leak that had to be here somewhere that would reveal itself to patient hands and experienced intuition. The fuel line was old, brittle, showing its age in ways that replacement parts and newer models never would. Sometimes the old stuff lasted longer, not because it was better engineered, but because it was simpler, because there were fewer systems to fail, because when something broke, you could see it with your eyes and fix it with your hands, instead of needing a computer diagnostic that cost more than the repair itself. The woman's heel clicked closer, close enough that Nash could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that probably had a French name and came in bottles smaller than his coffee mug, close enough to violate the unspoken boundaries of personal space that working-class America still respected. She nudged the creeper he was lying on. Not quite a kick, but close enough to telegraph her frustration, her assumption that physical contact was an acceptable escalation when verbal commands went unheeded. "I don't have time for this." Ice, now the temperature drop audible. "Fix this engine by sunset and I'll double your rate. Fail, and I'll have this entire block condemned for code violations. My attorneys can have inspectors here by morning. I imagine a thorough review of your electrical system, your waste disposal, your ADA compliance would reveal numerous violations. So unless you want to spend the next 6 months fighting city bureaucrats instead of fixing cars, I suggest you acknowledge my presence." Nash slid out from under the Ford with the deliberate slowness of someone who refused to be rushed by threats or money or the particular brand of entitlement that came with never having been denied anything significant. Stood to his full 6'1", feeling his spine compress slightly from the hours spent horizontal. Wiped his hands on a shop rag that had started life red but had long since surrendered to the permanent gray-brown of absorbed fluids. Looked at this woman who thought power came from the ability to destroy people's livelihoods with a phone call to the right office. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the level calm of someone who'd faced down worse than entitled executives. "Ma'am, I don't respond well to threats. And I sure as hell don't work on cars for people who treat me like help they can bully. You want your car fixed, you ask respectfully. Otherwise, there's the door. And before you call your attorneys, my building passed inspection 3 weeks ago. I've got ADA-compliant ramps because my father put them in when the law changed in '91, not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do. My electrical is up to code because I rewired it myself in 2015 using a master electrician's license I earned at night school while working full-time. And my waste disposal follows EPA guidelines stricter than Massachusetts requires because I don't dump poison into the same water my neighbors drink. So make your calls if you want, but you'll be wasting your time and mine." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or the unfamiliar experience of being told no by someone who couldn't be intimidated. Her mouth opened, likely preparing another salvo, when Lily appeared from behind the tire rack. "Grandpa, be nice." Lily's voice carried that particular sweetness she deployed when trying to manage his rougher edges. She looked sad. The woman's gaze dropped to Lily, taking in the portable heart monitor, the pale complexion that spoke of too many hours under fluorescent hospital lights, the purple journal still clutched in small hands. Her expression shifted, professional armor developing hairline cracks that suggested something human lived underneath the executive facade. "Are you sad because your car is broken?" Lily asked with the directness of children who hadn't yet learned that some questions were impolite. The woman's throat worked. When she spoke, her voice had lost its sharp edges, softened into something approaching vulnerability. "Yes, it was my husband's. He passed away 2 years ago." Lily nodded with the grave understanding of someone intimately familiar with loss. "Grandpa can fix it. He can fix anything. He's the best mechanic in Boston, maybe in all of Massachusetts. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's Honda when 5 other shops said it was impossible. He made it run perfect." Nash felt his resistance wavering, caught between his principled refusal to work for people who led with threats and the evidence of genuine pain in this woman's eyes. Grief recognized grief, and he saw his own reflection in her loss, the way mourning carved out spaces inside you that nothing ever quite filled, the desperate need to hold on to physical objects because the person who'd mattered was gone. "Let me look at it." The words came out rougher than intended. No promises, no deadlines, I work at the pace the job needs, not the pace you want. She nodded, seeming to understand she'd reached the limit of what demands could purchase here. Thank you, and I apologize for my rudeness. I'm not usually so. She trailed off, apparently unable to find words for what she'd been. Desperate. Nash supplied the word without judgment. Grief makes people desperate, makes them forget their manners. I understand that better than most. The tow truck driver had already unloaded the Shelby, positioned it in the bay with the careful reverence expensive automobiles commanded. Nash approached the car the way he approached all vehicles, with respect bordering on reverence, understanding that every machine represented someone's mobility, someone's freedom, sometimes someone's entire financial future. This particular machine represented something more, a connection to someone lost, a physical manifestation of memory, the last tangible piece of a relationship that death had severed. He circled the Eleanor slowly, hands not yet touching metal, just observing. The restoration work was museum quality. Every chrome detail, period-correct paint, deep enough to swim in interior leather that smelled like expensive nostalgia. Someone had loved this car, had invested not just money but attention, had understood that preservation was a form of remembrance. Nash could appreciate that kind of dedication even from people he didn't particularly like. Popped the hood with the gentle precision the task required. The 428 Cobra Jet 5.8 sat in the engine bay like a sleeping dragon, all latent power and mechanical poetry. Nash had worked on exactly 2 of these engines in his career, once as a young mechanic in '89, again during a brief stint at a restoration shop in the late '90s. Both times he'd felt the same reverence he experienced in churches, the sense that some human achievements transcended their practical function and became art. He didn't reach for diagnostic computers or electronic scanners. Instead, he leaned close, inhaling the scent of the engine bay fuel and oil and metal and the ghost of exhaust. Ran his fingers along fuel lines, feeling for abnormalities that eyes might miss. Checked connections by touch, trusting tactile memory built over 35 years to detect anomalies that measuring tools couldn't quantify. This was how his father had taught him, how he'd learned before computers made mechanics into technicians who read screens instead of understanding systems. 20 minutes passed in silence. The woman, she hadn't offered her name and Nash hadn't asked, stood near the workbench where Lily had returned to her homework. He could hear them talking quietly, Lily explaining about the heart monitor, the woman responding with questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite condescension. That small kindness bought her consideration that no amount of money could have purchased. Nash found it in the fuel line residue that didn't belong, discoloration that indicated contamination. Pulled the dipstick from the fuel tank, examined the sample. Oil and water didn't mix, everyone knew that. But sugar and gasoline created a syrup that would seize an engine solid, would turn precision machinery into expensive scrap metal. And this fuel had been contaminated deliberately, carefully, by someone who understood engines well enough to know exactly how to kill one without leaving obvious evidence. "Ma'am, I need you to see something." She crossed to the engine bay, heels clicking with less aggression now, more uncertainty. Nash pointed to the fuel line residue, then showed her the contaminated sample on the dipstick. "See this residue? That's not condensation. That's deliberate contamination. Someone drained your fuel, added water mixed with granulated sugar. Your engine wouldn't just stop, it would seize completely. At highway speed, that means total loss of control. No steering, no brakes, just dead weight rolling until physics took over." Color drained from her face. "That's impossible. This car's been in my private garage. Only my company staff have access." "Ma'am, this wasn't an accident." Nash kept his voice level, factual. "This was sabotage, professional work. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." He showed her additional evidence, the brake line connection loosened just enough to fail after 50 miles, the distributor cap tampered with to cause backfire and potential engine fire. 3 separate points of failure, each designed to look like mechanical breakdown, each potentially fatal. This wasn't vandalism or amateur hour. This was someone trying to commit murder with tools and expertise. Who would... She couldn't finish the question, seemed unable to process the implications. "I don't know who, but I know they had access to your vehicle. They understood automotive systems, and they wanted you dead. You need to call the police. This is attempted murder." Lily's heart monitor alarm shattered the moment high-pitched beeping that drove ice through Nash's chest. He was moving before conscious thought caught up, crossing the garage in 3 strides. Lily clutched her chest, face contorted in pain that no 12-year-old should understand. "Grandpa, it hurts." Nash dropped to his knees beside her, hands already reaching for the emergency medication kit he kept within arm's reach at all times. Nitroglycerin pill under her tongue, hand on her wrist, counting pulse fast, irregular, the familiar pattern of arrhythmia that could spiral into cardiac arrest if he didn't manage it correctly. Pulled out his phone, finger hovering over 911, waiting to see if the medication would work or if this was the call he dreaded making. "Breathe with me, baby. In through your nose. Hold it. Out through your mouth." He kept his voice calm, steady, betraying none of the terror flooding his system. Lily needed confidence, needed to believe this was manageable, needed her grandfather to be the rock that didn't crack even when the world was ending. "That's it. Perfect. You're doing perfect." 60 seconds that lasted hours. The monitor's beeping slowed, settled back into normal rhythm. Lily's face relaxed, pain receding like a tide going out. Nash felt his own heart restart, lungs, remember to pull oxygen, hands stop their invisible trembling. The woman, still unnamed, had retrieved a bottle of water from somewhere, was offering it with hands that shook almost as badly as Nash's. Will she be okay?" "For now." Nash helped Lily sip the water, watched her color slowly return to something approaching normal. "She has dilated cardiomyopathy. Heart doesn't pump blood efficiently. Episodes like this can spiral fast if we're not careful." "What's the treatment?" "Eventually transplant. Right now, medication management and prayer." Nash heard the bitterness in his own voice, the frustration of being a man who could fix any mechanical problem but couldn't repair the one thing that mattered most. "We're on the waiting list. Donor hearts for 12-year-olds don't exactly grow on trees. And even when we find one, surgery costs $650,000. Medicare covers 70% if we're lucky. I've got 127 saved." Not exactly confidence-inspiring math. The woman looked at Lily with an expression Nash couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, or the particular pain that came from seeing your own childhood trauma reflected in someone else's present. "My mother died when I was 12. Heart disease. I was alone after that. She shouldn't be." Something shifted in the air, a subtle recalibration of power dynamics and mutual understanding. Nash saw this woman not as an entitled executive, but as someone who'd survived loss young, who'd built walls because walls were safer than vulnerability, who'd forgotten how to ask for help because help had never arrived when she needed it most. "I need to hire you." She said it quietly, respectfully. "Not just to fix the car, to investigate. Find out who's trying to kill me. You found evidence trained security teams missed. You understand automotive systems better than anyone I've ever met. Please." Nash looked at Lily, who nodded with the certainty of someone who'd developed frightening wisdom about reading people and situations. Looked at this woman who'd walked in making threats and was now asking instead of demanding. Thought about the $650,000 he needed and the $127 he had, and the mathematical impossibility of bridging that gap on mechanics' wages. "I'm not a detective. I fix engines. You just found 3 different murder attempts in my car. That's better detective work than I've gotten from professionals I pay 6 figures. Her voice carried quiet desperation. "I'm scared. Someone close to me, someone with access, wants me dead. I need help from someone I can trust. And right now you're the only person who's shown me evidence and honesty instead of what they think I want to hear." Nash felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders, the same weight he'd carried since Jack's phone call about spongy brakes, since becoming Lily's guardian, since every moment when doing the right thing conflicted with doing the easy thing. His father's voice echoed in memory. "You see someone drowning, you don't ask if they can swim. You throw the rope. I'll look at your vehicle fleet, document what I find, give you evidence for the police. But I've got Lily. I can't just drop everything and bring her." The woman pulled out a business card, heavy stock embossed lettering, the kind of card that announced significance before a single word was read. Victoria Ashford, CEO, Ashford Motors. My company has a private medical floor, best pediatric cardiologists in the Northeast. She'll be monitored while you work. Full access to specialists, whatever she needs. Nash took the card, feeling its weight, understanding. The implicit offer wasn't just employment, but opportunity. Victoria Ashford didn't make this offer from altruism. She was buying his expertise and his discretion, but the motivation mattered less than the outcome. Lily would get world-class medical oversight. He'd get the resources to find whoever was turning automobiles into murder weapons. And maybe, just maybe, he'd earn enough to close the gap between $127,000 and $650,000. Okay. The word felt like stepping off a cliff without checking if the parachute was packed correctly. But we do this my way. I don't work on corporate timelines. I work at the pace that gets results. No shortcuts, no pressure to manufacture conclusions. You want the truth, you give me room to find it. Victoria extended her hand. Agreed. Her palm met his soft skin that had never known calluses, that spoke of manicures and office work and a life spent in climate-controlled environments. But her grip was firm, her eye contact steady, and Nash recognized the same determined survival instinct he saw in his own mirror every morning. They were both people who'd learned to keep moving because stopping meant drowning in grief they couldn't afford to acknowledge. I'll fix your Shelby first. Get you mobile while I investigate the rest. Nash released her hand, returned to the engine bay. This'll take a few hours. You're welcome to wait, but the accommodations aren't exactly plaza level. Victoria looked at the worn waiting area chairs, the coffee maker that had been brewing the same pot since Reagan, the overall aesthetic of functional neglect. She could have called a car service, could have returned to whatever five-star hotel she was staying at, could have exercised the privilege that came with being able to buy entire city blocks. Instead, she pulled out her phone, made a call, and settled into one of those terrible chairs like she'd been sentenced to purgatory, but was determined to serve her time with dignity. Nash worked through the afternoon, flushing contaminated fuel, replacing lines, checking every system for additional sabotage. Lily did homework nearby, occasionally asking Victoria questions about life outside Boston, outside working-class neighborhoods, outside the limited world that chronic illness had drawn around her existence. Victoria answered with unexpected patience, seemed almost grateful for the distraction, for the chance to be useful in a way that didn't involve corporate decisions or quarterly earnings. The rain continued its percussion against the garage roof, creating the kind of white noise that made focused work possible. Nash lost himself in the familiar rhythm: diagnose, repair, verify, repeat. This was the work he understood, the language he spoke fluently, the space where his hands knew exactly what to do, even when his heart had no idea how to process grief or fear or the weight of responsibility he carried. 6:47 p.m. Nash turned the key in the Shelby's ignition. The 428 Cobra jet roared to life, not just running, but singing the particular note that only perfectly tuned American muscle could produce. Deep, visceral, a sound that bypassed the brain and spoke directly to some primal part of human consciousness that understood power and engineering excellence. Victoria's eyes shone with tears she didn't let fall. It sounds exactly like when Richard drove it. That's a 428 Cobra Jet V8, ma'am. They don't make them like this anymore. When they're tuned right, they're pure mechanical poetry. Nash let the engine idle, listening for any anomalies, hearing none. Your husband had excellent taste, and whoever restored this did museum-quality work. Richard spent 3 years on the restoration, every Saturday, sometimes Sundays. He said it was meditation. Victoria's voice carried the particular softness of memory. I used to sit in the garage and watch him work. He'd explain what he was doing, why it mattered. I never understood half of it, but I loved watching his hands move. The precision, the care, the way he'd spend an hour making sure one bolt was perfect, because perfect was the only acceptable standard. Nash understood that intimacy, the particular bond between people who shared space and purpose, who built trust through action rather than words. He'd had that with Margaret, his wife, dead 5 years from cancer that had started in her breast and metastasized to her bones before anyone caught it. She'd sit in this garage doing crossword puzzles while he worked comfortable in his presence without needing conversation, just existing in the same space the way trees existed in forests, separate but connected. "What do I owe you?" Victoria stood reaching for her purse. "$180, parts and labor." She actually laughed sharp, disbelieving. "That's absurd. This is a $2 million automobile. Let me pay what the work is actually worth." "Ma'am, you don't get to tell me what my work is worth. $180. That's the price." Nash's voice carried the flat finality of someone who'd had this argument countless times and never once conceded. "You want to pay more? Donate it to Boston Children's Hospital Cardiac Unit. They can always use funding, but my rate's my rate. I don't charge based on how much money you have. I charge based on the work I did." Victoria studied him with the same intensity she'd probably brought to boardroom negotiations and hostile takeover defenses, trying to find the angle, the leverage point, the way to assert control in a situation where she had none. Finally seeming to understand that some things couldn't be purchased or negotiated, that integrity was its own currency that didn't exchange at any market rate. She wrote a check for $180, then wrote a second check for $25,000 made out to Boston Children's Hospital Richard Ashford Memorial Fund in the memo line, handed both to Nash without comment, without expectation of gratitude, just the simple transaction of someone honoring a request in the spirit it was intended. "Thank you, Nash, for everything." She paused at the garage door, one hand on the Shelby's door handle. "I meant what I said about hiring you. I'll have my assistant send over the details. Company fleet security protocols, employee access lists, whatever you need to investigate." "Victoria." Nash stopped her before she could leave. "Be careful. Whoever did this will try again. They've already invested time and expertise. They're not going to stop just because you survived the first attempt. Then I guess I'll need you to watch my back." Their eyes held a moment that lasted 3 seconds but felt heavier, weighted with possibilities neither was ready to examine. Then Victoria slid into the Shelby, fired the engine, and drove into the October evening rain with the particular growl of American engineering excellence echoing off brick buildings. Nash stood in his garage doorway watching taillights disappear, feeling the October cold seep through his work shirt, thinking about murder and sabotage and the way grief made people reckless with their own survival. Behind him, Lily's voice broke the moment. "She's nice. Sad, but nice. You like her." "She's a client kiddo." "Uh-huh." Lily's tone suggested she saw right through that particular fiction. "You should go on a date. You haven't dated anyone since Grandma Margaret died. That was 5 years ago. Dr. Wells says isolation isn't healthy for the heart, and you're always telling me to listen to Dr. Wells." Nash turned to find his granddaughter watching him with the particular knowing expression that 12-year-olds developed when they'd spent too much time around adults dealing with crisis. She'd closed her homework, had missed her. Patches, the stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, was ready for the evening routine of medication and dinner and the careful calibration between normal childhood and medical emergency. "I'm 60 years old, Lily. Too old for dating. Grandma Margaret was 53 when you married her. You told me that. Said love doesn't care about numbers on a calendar." She stood, gathered her things with practiced efficiency. "Plus, Victoria looked at you the way Mrs. Patterson looks at Mr. Patterson when he doesn't know she's watching, like she's thirsty and you're water." "Where did you learn to talk like that?" "Romance novels in the hospital waiting room. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brings them. They're very educational about adult emotional states and interpersonal dynamics." Lily said this with complete seriousness, as if citing academic research. "Also, Victoria needs someone to trust, and you need someone besides me to care about. It's good for both of you." Nash locked the garage door, set the ancient alarm system that probably wouldn't deter determined thieves, but might slow down opportunistic ones. Guided Lily upstairs to the apartment above the shop. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen, barely big enough for 2 people to occupy simultaneously, the exact opposite of spacious but home nonetheless. This was where he'd raised Jack after their parents died, where he'd lived with Margaret during their too brief marriage, where Lily had learned to navigate a world that kept threatening to take her before she'd really lived in it. They fell into evening routine with the synchronization of practice. Lily's medication array, 4 pills 3 times daily, each one a different color and size, a rainbow of pharmaceutical intervention keeping her alive. Nash cooked dinner spaghetti with sauce from a jar because neither of them had developed ambitions toward culinary excellence. They ate at the small table by the window overlooking the garage, talking about Lily's day at school, about the hamster monitoring responsibilities she'd earned, about everything except heart conditions and murder attempts, and the weight of mortality that shadowed both their lives. After dinner, after dishes, after the final medication dose and the careful checking of the heart monitor's battery levels, Nash sat on the edge of Lily's bed while she wrote in her purple journal. The routine they'd developed, the small ritual that marked day's end, 3 good things, evidence that life was worth living, even when life was hard. "What did you write today?" Nash asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. Lily showed him the page. Her handwriting had improved over 2 years, had gone from careful printing to something approaching cursive, another small victory in the accumulation of small victories that constituted childhood development. Number 1, Mr. Henderson let me be hamster monitor even though I missed school Thursday for my appointment. Number 2, Grandpa made Mickey Mouse pancakes. Number 3, I met a sad lady who Grandpa can maybe help not be sad anymore. Nash felt something catch in his throat, the particular emotion that came from watching someone you loved demonstrate wisdom. You hadn't taught them that they'd learned from suffering and observation, and the accelerated education that came from facing mortality at 12. Those are really good things, baby, really good. What are your 3 good things, Grandpa? He thought about it, actually considered, instead of deflecting the way he usually did. Number 1, Jimmy Patterson's truck is running so he won't lose his job. Number 2, your heart episode today resolved quickly. Number 3, I met someone who might need fixing as much as the engines I work on. Lily smiled the real smile, not the brave one she deployed for doctors and concerned teachers. That's the first time you've put a person on your list instead of just work stuff. Progress. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You're just noticing more because I'm getting better at hiding how smart I am. She settled under her blankets, Mr. Patches tucked close. Grandpa, if you help Victoria, will she pay you enough for my surgery? The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus, direct, unflinching, the kind of honesty kids deployed when adults had stopped being honest with them. Maybe. I don't know yet. But I'm going to try everything I can, Lily. Everything. I know. You always do. Her eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling her toward sleep with the gravity of medication and a body that worked harder than it should just to maintain basic function. Love you, Grandpa. Love you too, baby. More than all the stars. Nash sat there until her breathing evened into sleep, until the heart monitor displayed its steady rhythm, until he was certain this night wouldn't be the night he lost her. Then he retreated to his own room, barely furnished, mostly functional, a space for sleeping rather than living, and sat on the edge of his bed with Victoria Ashford's business card in his hands. Ashford Motors. He knew the company by reputation: luxury vehicles, cutting-edge design, the kind of automobiles featured in magazine spreads and celebrity driveways. They'd been expanding aggressively, acquiring smaller manufacturers, consolidating market share, doing all the things corporations did in pursuit of quarterly earnings and shareholder value. Victoria Ashford had taken over as CEO 7 years ago after her husband's death had been featured in business journals as one of the youngest women to helm a major automotive manufacturer, had built a reputation for ruthless efficiency and strategic brilliance. And someone wanted her dead badly enough to attempt sophisticated sabotage, to risk federal charges to turn precision engineering into murder weapon. That suggested professional stakes. Corporate rivals, disgruntled employees, someone with resources and motivation, and the particular kind of desperation that came from having something to gain or everything to lose. Nash pulled out his laptop, 5 years old, running slow, adequate for basic research and email, and started reading. Victoria Ashford, 45, widowed, no children, estimated net worth $800 million. Graduated Harvard Business School, worked her way up through Ashford Motors' finance division, married the founder's son, took over when he died. Board of directors included several old money families, venture capitalists, and Marcus Blackwood, COO, age 62, former NASCAR crew chief turned corporate executive, Marcus Blackwood. Nash knew that name, knew that face from old photos and older memories. They'd worked together briefly in '93 Daytona Pit Crew before Marcus had taken a corporate position at Ford and Nash had stayed in the garage trenches. Last he'd heard, Marcus was climbing executive ladders while Nash was rebuilding carburetors. Different paths, different definitions of success. The fork in the road where talent could go toward money or craft, but rarely both. His phone buzzed text message from unknown number. "This is Victoria. Thank you again for today. My assistant will send the fleet documentation tomorrow. Please be careful investigating. Whoever did this is dangerous professional and close to me. I don't want you hurt." Nash typed back, "Careful is my default setting. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start finding answers." He set the phone aside, lay back on his bed, stared at the ceiling where water stains created maps of imaginary continents. Thought about Victoria Ashford's eyes when she'd looked at the Shelby, about the way grief lived in people like permanent resident rather than temporary visitor, about the mathematics of saving Lily's life, one investigation at a time. Sleep came eventually, fitful and shallow, interrupted by dreams of engine blocks and heart monitors and the sound of his brother's voice on the phone talking about spongy brakes that Nash had said could wait until Sunday. Manhattan rose from the October morning like steel teeth biting clouds, 40 stories of glass and ambition reflecting dawn light that had no business being this cold, this early in autumn. Nash Brennan sat in the passenger seat of Victoria's town car, leather interior, that probably cost more than his entire vehicle climate control, maintaining precise 72 degrees, the kind of insulated comfort that made you forget seasons existed, watching the city materialize through tinted windows. Beside him, Lily pressed her nose against glass cataloging skyscrapers, with the wide-eyed fascination of someone whose world had previously topped out at Boston's modest skyline. Victoria had sent the car at 6 a.m. professional driver who'd loaded Nash's tool cases without comment, who'd helped Lily into the back seat with the careful courtesy of someone trained to make wealthy clients feel attended without feeling watched. The drive had taken 4 hours through morning traffic that moved with the aggressive efficiency of people who measured time in billable increments. Nash had spent those hours reviewing documentation. Victoria's assistant had emailed fleet manifests, maintenance logs, employee access records, the paper trail of corporate machinery that kept executives mobile. Ashford Motors headquarters occupied floors 30 through 40 of a tower that announced its importance through architecture, all chrome and glass, and the particular aesthetic of companies that wanted you to know they were thinking about the future while you were stuck in the present. The lobby featured concept vehicles displayed like museum pieces, automotive design as art rather than transportation. Nash recognized the models from trade publications, electric sedans that promised zero emissions and 3-second acceleration hybrid SUVs marketed to environmentally conscious executives who needed to shuttle between yoga studios and board meetings, the intersection of performance and sustainability that defined modern luxury manufacturing. Victoria met them in the executive garage sublevel 3 private elevator access security that required biometric scanning and clearance codes. She wore different armor today. Navy suit that suggested authority without aggression. Hair down instead of severely bound expression that acknowledged their shared understanding from yesterday without presuming familiarity. Behind her stood a man Nash recognized from old photographs and older memories. Marcus Blackwood had aged the way corporate executives aged, well-preserved through expensive health care and stress management, silver hair styled with precision posture that suggested gym memberships and personal trainers. But his eyes carried something Nash remembered from pit crew days, the particular focus of someone who understood that milliseconds mattered, that precision was the difference between winning and catastrophic failure. Those eyes widened, seeing Nash, surprise registering before professional composure reasserted control. Nash Brennan from the '93 Daytona circuit. Nash stepped forward, extended his hand. Marcus Webb, I'll be damned, didn't recognize you in the suit. Their palms met. Marcus's grip still strong despite decades behind desks, calluses long faded, but muscle memory intact. It's Blackwood now, Changed it when I went corporate. Web sounded too blue-collar. What the hell are you doing here? Consulting on vehicle safety protocols. Nash watched Marcus's expression shift, calculating, trying to reconcile the grease-stained mechanic from memory with whatever role Victoria had assigned him. Someone's been tampering with the company fleet. I'm here to find out who. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Surprise, maybe, or concern, or the particular wariness of someone who understood that investigations uncovered things people wanted buried. Our security is top-notch. I can't imagine how anyone could— Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to redirecting conversations. And yet my Shelby was sabotaged, in my private garage, with security supposedly monitoring access, which means whoever's doing this either has authorization or knows how to bypass systems that cost me 6 figures to install. The executive garage held 6 vehicles: Victoria's daily driver Tesla, a Range Rover for winter weather, Mercedes S-Class for formal occasions, Porsche Cayenne for weekend escapes, plus 2 vehicles Nash assumed were corporate pool cars based on their generic luxury and fleet registration. He approached each with methodical patience, starting visual inspection, while Marcus watched with barely concealed skepticism, and Victoria made phone calls that required her to pace and gesture the way people did when managing crisis remotely. Lily settled into a corner with her homework portable heart monitor beeping its steady rhythm, drawing occasional glances from Marcus, who seemed uncertain how to process a child's presence in executive space. Nash caught him staring once, saw something like recognition or perhaps memory cross his features before professional distance reasserted itself. The Tesla revealed its secrets: first brake lines scored with precision tools shallow enough to avoid immediate failure but deep enough to guarantee catastrophic breakdown within 500 miles. Nash photographed the damage from multiple angles, documented the specific pattern of scoring that suggested professional knowledge rather than amateur vandalism. The Range Rover showed similar attention: oil drain plug loosened exactly enough to create slow leak engine seizure, inevitable within 1,000 miles. Mercedes coolant system contaminated with substance Nash couldn't immediately identify but suspected was designed to cause overheating and potential fire. 3 hours of examination yielded pattern evidence. All tampering occurred in locations that suggested intimate familiarity with each vehicle's specific vulnerabilities. All modifications designed to appear as mechanical failure rather than sabotage. All executed with precision that spoke to professional training and patient planning. This wasn't rage or impulse. This was methodical murder disguised as automotive maintenance. Nash pulled maintenance logs, cross-referenced service dates with the physical evidence. Every tampered vehicle had been serviced within the past 8 months by the same technician, James Peterson, hired March 2024, credentials listing ASE Master Certification and 15 years experience with European luxury vehicles. Clean background check, solid references, the kind of resume that raised no flags during hiring. I need to talk to Peterson. Nash found Victoria between phone calls, showed her the pattern. He's either responsible or being set up. Either way, he's the connection. Victoria made another call, brief conversation with someone named Jennifer, who apparently managed HR functions. Her expression shifted during the exchange, surprise bleeding into concern, bleeding into something harder to read. She ended the call with the particular finality of someone who'd just learned information that changed calculations. Peterson called in sick 3 days ago. Hasn't been back since. Jennifer's trying his emergency contact numbers. All disconnected. Victoria's voice carried the flat tone of someone forcing emotion aside to focus on logistics. His listed address is an abandoned building in Queens. References trace back to companies that dissolved 5 years ago. He's a ghost, Nash. Someone created an entire identity just to gain access to my vehicles. Marcus had joined them during this exchange, positioned himself close enough to hear without appearing to eavesdrop. His face showed careful neutrality, but Nash noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists before consciously relaxing. Reading people was like reading engines. You learned to notice the small tells that indicated larger problems. Who authorized Peterson's hire? Nash kept his voice neutral, investigative rather than accusatory. Victoria consulted her phone, scrolling through emails with practiced efficiency. Eleanor Whitmore, my CFO. She handles all facilities staffing, including garage personnel. I'll have her pulled from her meeting. No. Nash's interruption stopped Victoria mid-motion. Don't alert anyone yet. If Whitmore's involved, warning her gives time to cover tracks. I need to see Peterson's employment file, personnel records, anything that went through official channels. But quietly, without triggering awareness that we're investigating. Marcus cleared his throat, a sound that commanded attention through sheer unexpectedness. I can help with that. I have system access that doesn't log audit trails. Holdover from when Richard wanted executives able to review sensitive information without creating paper trails that Discovery could subpoena. His eyes met Nash's. If you're doing this, do it right. Corporate politics are messier than pit crew dynamics. People here play for keeps. Something in Marcus's tone suggested warning rather than threat, experience talking to inexperience about waters that ran deeper than surface investigation revealed. Nash nodded acknowledgement, filed the subtext for later analysis. Appreciate that. But why help Victoria as your boss? If there's internal conspiracy, you're either part of it or risking yourself by assisting investigation. Marcus's expression hardened into something Nash recognized from their shared past, the particular determination of someone who'd made mistakes and was trying to correct course before consequences became permanent. Because I climbed the corporate ladder by stepping on people who trusted me, made choices I'm not proud of, became what I swore I'd never be. He glanced at Victoria, then back to Nash. Victoria doesn't know this, but I flagged Eleanor's financial irregularities 6 months ago. Offshore transfers, budget overruns that didn't match actual expenditures. I brought it to Richard before he died. He said he'd handle it. Then he had a stroke and the investigation died with him. I should have pushed harder, should have gone to Victoria. Instead, I let it slide, told myself it wasn't my problem. If Eleanor's involved in this, I'm partially responsible for not stopping her sooner. Victoria's phone rang, different ringtone, urgent rather than routine. She answered, listened, and Nash watched color drain from her face in real time. Her free hand gripped the edge of the Tesla's hood, knuckles whitening with pressure that sought anchor in physical sensation when emotional ground shifted beneath her. How long has she been unconscious? Pause for response. Nash couldn't hear. Yes, I understand. We're leaving now. She ended the call with trembling hands, looked at Nash with eyes that carried the particular terror of someone who'd just been reminded that control was illusion. That was Lily's school. She collapsed during recess. Ambulance is taking her to Mount Sinai. Nash was moving before conscious thought caught up, tool cases, abandoned investigation, forgotten every priority, realigning around the singular imperative of reaching Lily before the universe took another person he loved. Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him at the elevator. My helicopter, roof access, will be there in 12 minutes. She was already walking, heels clicking rapid percussion against polished concrete, phone to her ear, coordinating logistics that wealth could purchase. Jennifer, I need the flight crew ready in 3 minutes. Medical emergency. Mount Sinai Hospital, priority clearance for rooftop landing. The helicopter was obscene, corporate luxury, leather seats, noise cancellation that reduced rotor thunder to background hum. Nash barely registered any of it, focused instead on the digital clock counting seconds that felt like hours. Each number increment a reminder that Lily's heart was failing and he wasn't there. The city scrolled beneath them in miniature cars like toys, people like ants, the whole machinery of urban existence reduced to irrelevant detail when measured against a 12-year-old's mortality. Mount Sinai materialized faster than ground traffic could have managed, rooftop helipad receiving them with practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't Victoria's first emergency requiring aerial transport. Hospital staff met them with wheelchair. Nash didn't need, but Victoria insisted upon navigating corridors with the speed of people trained to balance urgency against hospital regulation. Pediatric cardiac wing, 4th floor ICU section that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular chemical cocktail hospitals used to mask the scent of suffering. Dr. Catherine Wells waited outside Lily's room. 55, gray hair pulled back efficiently. Lab coat bearing stains that suggested she'd been in surgery recently. Her expression carried the careful neutrality medical professionals deployed when delivering news that would hurt, but had to be said anyway. "Mr. Brennan, Lily experienced sustained ventricular tachycardia. Her heart rate exceeded 200 beats per minute for approximately 4 minutes before emergency response arrived. We've stabilized her with medication, but—" She paused, choosing words with the precision of someone who understood their weight. "Her heart function has deteriorated significantly. We need to move her up the transplant list immediately. Without a donor organ, I'm giving her 4 months. 6 if we're very lucky and manage medication perfectly." The floor tilted. Nash felt Victoria's hand on his elbow steadying him through physical contact when equilibrium failed. 4 months. Halloween to Valentine's Day. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year. All the markers of time that might be Lily's last experiences of holidays she'd barely had chance to understand. What are her chances of getting a donor in that time frame? Dr. Wells's expression answered before words did. 12-year-old hearts are rare. We have 300 children nationally waiting for pediatric cardiac transplants. Last year we performed 62. The mathematics are difficult. Nash pushed past her into Lily's room, needed to see with his own eyes that she was breathing, that monitors showed heartbeat, however irregular. She lay in the hospital bed looking impossibly small against white sheets. Portable monitor replaced by professional equipment that tracked every vital function with digital precision. Her eyes were closed, face peaceful in medicated sleep, unaware that medical professionals were calculating her remaining time in months rather than years. He sat in the chair beside her bed, took her hand carefully around the IV line, feeding fluids and medication. Felt the fragile bones beneath skin so pale it showed blue veins like road maps. This was Jack's daughter Sarah's legacy, the last piece of a brother Nash had failed to save. If he lost her too, if he couldn't bridge the gap between 127,000 saved and 650,000 needed. Jack's bloodline ended here in this antiseptic room with machines beeping countdown to mortality. Victoria stood in the doorway, maintaining respectful distance, phone in hand, but not making calls. Just present, witnessing, offering the particular support that came from shared understanding of loss, rather than empty platitudes about divine plans or silver linings. Nash appreciated that silence more than any words, recognized it as the same courtesy he'd extended when she'd grieved over the Shelby acknowledgement without intrusion. Hours passed, measured in monitor beeps and nurse rotations and the slow diminishment of October light through institutional windows. Dr. Wells returned with updates. Lily's rhythm had stabilized. Medication was maintaining adequate cardiac output. They'd keep her overnight for observation, but barring complications, she could discharge tomorrow with adjusted medication protocol. All news delivered in the careful positive framing doctors used when the underlying truth was that they were buying time rather than providing cure. Lily woke at 6 p.m. groggy from medication but alert enough to register her surroundings. Her first words carried the weary acceptance of someone who'd made peace with hospitals being inevitable rather than occasional. "Did I miss homework?" Nash felt laughter and tears fighting for dominance in his throat. "You scared 10 years off my life and you're worried about math worksheets." "Mrs. Henderson gets upset when I fall behind. She doesn't understand that hospitals don't excuse tardiness, just explain it." Lily shifted slightly, accommodating IV lines and monitor wires with practiced efficiency. "How long do I have to stay this time?" "Just overnight if your numbers stay stable. Dr. Wells wants to monitor the new medication dosage." Nash smoothed hair from her forehead, the gesture automatic and insufficient. "You gave us quite a scare, kiddo." "Sorry. My heart doesn't always give warning before it acts up." She noticed Victoria standing in the doorway, offered a smile that carried none of the resentment Nash would have expected from a 12-year-old whose childhood had been stolen by malfunctioning biology. "Hi, Miss Victoria. Did you come all the way here just for me?" Victoria moved into the room with the careful uncertainty of someone unaccustomed to pediatric spaces. "Of course I did. Your grandfather's working for me now. That makes us associates. And associates support each other. We're friends." Lily's correction carried gentle firmness. Associates is business. Friends is people who show up when hearts stop working right. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, the walls cracking enough to show genuine emotion underneath executive composure. She sat in the chair on Lily's other side, maintaining careful distance but present nonetheless. "You're right. We're friends. And friends bring gifts." She pulled a wrapped package from her bag, handed it over with the awkward formality of someone unpracticed in gift-giving. Lily unwrapped it with the excited care of children who didn't receive presents often enough to be casual about the experience. Inside, a leather journal, expensive weight and quality embossed with Lily's initials in gold leaf. Different from her purple unicorn notebook, more sophisticated, the kind of gift that acknowledged growth rather than treating her like a child. "For your good things list." Victoria's voice carried unexpected softness. "I thought maybe you'd appreciate an upgrade, something that treats your writing with the importance it deserves." Lily ran fingers over the embossed initials, eyes bright with tears she didn't let fall. "It's perfect. Thank you. I'll use it every day. Will you help me start it? Write the first entry together?" Victoria glanced at Nash, seeking permission, or perhaps escape route, finding neither. "I don't think I have good things to write. I'm not very good at noticing them." "That's okay. I'll teach you." Lily opened to the first page, pulled a pen from the hospital bedside table. "Start with something small, something that happened today that didn't make you sad." Victoria considered clearly struggling with an exercise that should have been simple but had become foreign through years of calculated emotional distance. "Your grandfather fixed my car yesterday. When it started, it sounded exactly like when my husband drove it. That was good. Painful, but good." "Write it down, in your own words." Victoria took the journal and pen, wrote slowly with the careful precision of someone unused to personal documentation. Showed Lily the result. "Today Nash Brennan made my husband's car sing again. For 3 minutes I remembered what it felt like when Richard was alive and I wasn't just surviving." Lily read it, nodded approval. "That's really good. See, you do have good things. You just forgot how to look for them. Now write 2 more. I don't think 2 more. That's the rule. 3 good things every day. If I can do it with a broken heart, you can do it with a broken life." The blunt assessment landed with enough force that Victoria actually flinched. Nash watched her internal struggle, the executive armor fighting against vulnerability, calculation warring with authenticity. Finally, she wrote again, slower this time, words pulled from somewhere deeper. Number 2. A 12-year-old girl reminded me that feeling pain means I'm still capable of feeling anything at all. Number 3. I met someone who treats time with sick children as more important than quarterly earnings. This gives me hope that integrity still exists somewhere. Lily read it, smiled with satisfaction of a teacher whose student had grasped a difficult concept. "Perfect. Now you have to do this every day. Promise." Victoria's throat worked, emotion breaking through despite clear effort to maintain composure. "I promise. Every day. 3 good things even when I don't want to look for them." They sat in companionable silence, broken only by monitor beeps and hallway sounds of hospital operation nurses changing shifts, medication carts rolling past the ambient machinery of institutional healing. Nash felt something settle in his chest, recognition that this moment mattered beyond its immediate context. Victoria wasn't just humoring a sick child. She was allowing herself to be taught to be vulnerable, to acknowledge that her billions couldn't purchase the particular wisdom that came from facing mortality at 12. Dr. Wells returned at 8 p.m. with discharge parameters, medication adjustments, activity restrictions, warning signs that required immediate return to emergency care. Nash memorized every detail with the focused attention he brought to complex repairs, understanding that Lily's survival required precision equal to any automotive system. Victoria listened too, asked clarifying questions that suggested genuine investment rather than polite interest, took notes on her phone with the same intensity she probably brought to board presentations. They left the hospital at 9, Victoria's driver waiting with the town car, the city transformed by darkness into something simultaneously more dangerous and more beautiful. Lily fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by medication and cardiac stress, head resting against Nash's shoulder, with the complete trust of children who still believed adults could protect them from everything, including biology. Victoria sat across from them, illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights, expression unreadable in the shifting shadows. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet intensity of confessions made in darkness, because darkness permitted honesty, daylight forbade. My mother died when I was 12. Heart disease, same as Lily. I watched her deteriorate over 2 years, strong woman becoming weaker, vibrant presence fading into medical equipment and hospital rooms. My father couldn't handle it. He'd leave for work and not come back until after visiting hours, claimed business required his attention when really he just couldn't bear watching her die by inches. So I sat with her alone, held her hand, wrote down good things in a notebook because the hospital social worker said it would help process grief. She paused, streetlight catching tears on her face. After she died, my father threw himself into building Ashford Motors, remarried within a year, woman 20 years younger who wanted his money, not his emotional baggage. I learned then that love was liability, that caring too much about people meant they could hurt you when they left. So I built walls, made myself steel, promised I'd never need anyone badly enough that their absence could destroy me. Nash understood that confession for what it was, not plea for sympathy, but explanation, context for why Victoria had walked into his garage making threats instead of requests, why she'd forgotten how to ask for help, why she'd become the ice queen, business journals wrote about with admiration that barely masked criticism. Grief turned people into armor, taught them that protection meant distance, that the only safe heart was one encased in steel. Then you met Richard. Nash kept his voice low, conscious of Lily sleeping against him. Then I met Richard, who was patient enough to wait until I was ready, who understood that trust took time, who loved me despite every defense mechanism I deployed to keep him at arm's length. We had 18 years together, good years. Then he had a stroke at 53, died before I could tell him. Her voice broke, caught on grief too large for words. Before I could tell him that I'd finally learned how to be human instead of just successful. The town car navigated Boston streets, delivery them back to Nash's neighborhood, where October cold had settled like tangible presence. Victoria walked them to the apartment above the garage, helped Nash settle Lily into bed with the careful attention of someone relearning how to be gentle after years of calculated hardness, stood in the small kitchen afterward looking impossibly out of place in corporate attire, surrounded by Nash's working-class domesticity. I want to fund Lily's transplant, all of it, surgery, recovery, medication, whatever she needs. The words came fast, rehearsed like she'd been building toward this offer all evening. Consider it part of your consulting fee. I know you need $650,000. I can write that check tonight. No strings, no obligations beyond finding who's trying to kill me. Nash had expected this offer, had spent hospital hours anticipating its arrival, had already decided his response. No. Victoria's expression cycled through surprise and confusion toward something approaching anger. No. Your granddaughter needs surgery that costs more than you'll earn in 5 years, and you're saying no. I'm saying I don't take charity. Not from you, not from anyone. Nash kept his voice level, explaining rather than attacking. You want to pay me for investigation work. Fine. Set a rate, I'll earn it. But I won't take money I haven't worked for, not even to save Lily's life, because the moment I do that, I become what you accused me of being. Yesterday, help you can buy and dismiss. I need to be able to look myself in the mirror, Victoria. Need to know I earned what I got through skill and effort, not sympathy and handouts. That's pride talking. Stupid, stubborn, masculine pride that puts ego ahead of practical need. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only thing that makes me different from people who'd sabotage vehicles for money, who'd compromise principles for profit, who'd become exactly what my father warned me never to be. Nash met her glare with calm certainty. You want to help Lily, pay me fair rate for fair work. I'll save every dollar, work every hour, find every angle. And when I've earned enough through my own effort, I'll pay for her surgery, knowing I didn't compromise who I am to save who she is. They stood in his cramped kitchen, her in designer suit, him in work clothes that carried the day's grime, separated by philosophy and class, and the fundamental question of whether accepting help meant surrendering dignity. Finally, Victoria nodded, expression shifting from anger toward something approaching respect. Fine. Standard industry rate for automotive forensic investigation is $300 per hour. I'm authorizing unlimited hours until we find who's responsible. Document your time, submit invoices weekly, and for God's sake, let me help in the only way I know how. She moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the knob. And Nash, what you said earlier about looking yourself in the mirror, that's not pride, that's integrity. I'd forgotten the difference until today. She left heels clicking downstairs toward the waiting car, leaving Nash alone with sleeping granddaughter and the weight of choices made. He sat at his kitchen table with calculator and notebook running numbers that refused to add favorably no matter how many times he reconfigured the mathematics. 300 per hour, 40 hours per week if he worked efficiently 12 weeks until he hit $650,000, assuming Victoria's investigation required that duration. But Lily had 4 months, maybe 6, and transplant lists didn't wait for convenient financial arrangements. His phone buzzed. Text from Marcus Blackwood sent from number Nash didn't recognize. Found something you need to see. Peterson's employment file has digital fingerprints that trace back to Eleanor Whitmore's office terminal. She created him, hired him, gave him access. Meet me tomorrow 7 a.m. my office. Come alone. If Eleanor's watching, we can't afford to alert her before we have evidence that sticks. Nash typed response, I'll be there. And Marcus, thanks for the assist. Means something that you're risking yourself to do. Right thing. Reply came fast. I'm not risking myself. I'm trying to sleep at night again. There's a difference. See you at 7. Nash set his phone aside, checked on Lily one final time, still sleeping monitor, displaying acceptable rhythms, chest rising and falling with mechanical consistency that would have to substitute for health until donor hearts and surgical miracles aligned. Pulled out his own notebook, the one he'd started keeping after Margaret died, the one he'd neglected for months because what good things existed in a world that took wives and brothers and slowly killed granddaughters. Wrote 3 entries in handwriting that had deteriorated from his father's careful precision to something barely legible. Number 1. Lily survived today. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed, but tonight she's breathing. Number 2. Victoria Ashford remembered how to feel pain. This matters more than she knows. Number 3. Marcus Blackwood is trying to become someone he can respect again. Maybe we all get second chances if we're brave enough to take them. He closed the notebook, set it beside Lily's new journal on the kitchen table, 2 records of attempting to find light in darkness. Outside, Boston settled into night sounds. Traffic, diminishing voices fading, the city exhaling after holding breath through another day of barely contained chaos. Nash sat in his kitchen chair listening to his granddaughter breathe in the next room, thinking about sabotage and surgery and the peculiar mathematics of trying to save lives with hourly wages. Tomorrow he'd meet Marcus, gather evidence, move closer to identifying whoever was turning vehicles into murder weapons. Tomorrow he'd document hours and submit invoices and accumulate dollars toward the $650,000 that stood between Lily and transplant. Tomorrow he'd continue the investigation that was his only path to earning what charity couldn't provide. But tonight, he just sat listening to monitors beep, feeling October cold seep through old windows, counting the hours until dawn arrived, and the machinery of survival resumed its relentless operation. Some problems couldn't be fixed with wrenches and experience. Some systems failed despite perfect maintenance. Some hearts stopped regardless of how carefully you protected them. But you kept working anyway, kept trying anyway, kept believing that skill and effort mattered even when mathematics suggested futility, because the alternative was giving up. And Nash Brennan had never learned how to do that, had built a life on the principle that broken things could be fixed if you understood their systems well enough, cared deeply enough, refused to accept that some failures were inevitable. Lily's heart was broken. Victoria's soul was damaged. Marcus's conscience was compromised. Eleanor's grief had turned murderous, all systems failing in different ways, all requiring repair work that transcended mechanical expertise. Nash was just a mechanic. But mechanics understood that everything eventually could be understood and fixed. You just had to be willing to do the work however long it took, however much it cost, however impossible the mathematics appeared. Tomorrow the work continued, Tonight he just had to keep breathing, keep Lily breathing, keep believing that morning would bring solutions that darkness obscured. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The city hummed its endless song. And in a small apartment above a garage in Boston's working-class district, a 58-year-old mechanic sat alone with his thoughts and his fears and his desperate hope that skill would prove sufficient when love alone clearly wasn't enough. Marcus Blackwood's office occupied the 38th floor corner windows, offering Manhattan views that probably cost more in annual lease than Nash's entire building was worth furniture, that whispered old money and careful curation, the kind of space designed to intimidate before conversations even started. Nash arrived at 6:55 a.m. early by habit and intention, finding Marcus already present with coffee brewing and document stacks arranged with military precision across a conference table that could seat 12 but currently hosted only evidence of corporate malfeasance. The man waiting bore little resemblance to the pit crew chief Nash remembered from '93. That version had worn grease-stained coveralls and communicated in rapid-fire instructions during tire changes that required split-second coordination. This Marcus inhabited expensive suits like armor, spoke in measured corporate cadence, carried himself with the particular wariness of someone who'd climbed high enough to understand how far the fall would be. But his eyes held the same sharp focus, the recognition that details mattered, that overlooking small problems created catastrophic failures. "Coffee's fresh. Help yourself." Marcus gestured toward a setup that probably cost more than Nash's monthly grocery budget Italian espresso machine grinder, with settings Nash didn't understand, milk frother that looked like it required engineering degree to operate. "I've been here since 4. Couldn't sleep knowing what I found." Nash poured basic coffee black, refusing to wrestle with technology when simple sufficed. "What am I looking at?" Marcus spread documents across polished wood, employment applications, background checks, authorization forms, digital audit trails that tracked every keystroke through Ashford Motors' personnel system. James Peterson doesn't exist. Never did. But the digital signature that created his identity belongs to Eleanor Whitmore's executive terminal. She built him from scratch, fake social security number, fabricated work history references that trace back to shell companies she established 3 years ago. Everything designed to pass basic screening but collapse under serious investigation. Nash examined the evidence with the same systematic attention he brought to engine diagnostics. The pattern was clear once you knew where to look. Personnel files created at 3 a.m. when normal hiring wouldn't occur, authorization codes bypassing standard verification protocols, digital fingerprints leading directly back to Eleanor's computer access. Amateur work in some ways, sophisticated in others, the kind of planning that suggested desperation overriding caution. Why would your CFO risk federal fraud charges to plant a fake mechanic? What's the end game? Marcus pulled up additional files on his laptop, rotated the screen so Nash could see financial records that painted a picture of systematic embezzlement spanning years. Eleanor's been bleeding the company dry. $4.7 million transferred to offshore accounts through fake vendor invoices and inflated R&D budgets. I flagged it to Richard 2.5 years ago, 6 months before his stroke. He promised to handle it quietly, preserve Eleanor's dignity, give her chance to return the money and resign without criminal charges. Then, he died. The timeline crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. Richard Ashford dies. Investigation dies with him. Eleanor continues, embezzling. Victoria remains oblivious because she trusted her late husband's inner circle. But something had changed, some variable that transformed white-collar theft into attempted murder. Victoria announced plans to audit all departments 3 months ago. Complete financial review, outside accounting firm, the kind of examination that would expose Eleanor's theft within weeks. Marcus's voice carried the flat tone of someone reciting facts that led inevitably toward tragedy. Eleanor needed Victoria dead before that audit happened. Corporate insurance pays out massive death benefit to key executives. Board goes into crisis mode. Audit gets delayed during transition chaos. Eleanor has time to cover tracks, maybe even position herself for CEO role given her seniority and institutional knowledge. Nash thought about the Shelby's sabotage, the methodical tampering across Victoria's fleet, the careful planning that suggested professional expertise rather than desperate improvisation. Eleanor doesn't have automotive knowledge. She'd need help, someone who understood vehicles well enough to kill without leaving obvious evidence. She has a nephew. David Whitmore, 34, works as a technician at a luxury dealership in Connecticut. ASE Master, certified 15 years experience with high-end European vehicles. Same skill set as our ghost employee Peterson. Marcus pulled up a photo young man with Eleanor's sharp features wearing mechanics coveralls, standing beside a lifted Mercedes in a service bay that screamed expensive clientele. David's mother, Eleanor's sister, died in a car accident 3 years ago. Single vehicle crash brake failure vehicle was an Ashford Motors prototype sedan. Company settled for $2 million, made Eleanor sign NDA about the defect that caused the accident. The pieces locked together with the terrible precision of a mechanism designed for one purpose. Eleanor's sister dies because Ashford Motors produces defective vehicle. Richard covers it up to protect stock price and company reputation. Eleanor takes the settlement money, buries her grief in work, begins embezzling as proxy revenge. Then Richard dies before facing consequences. Victoria inherits the empire. Eleanor's grief metastasizes into murder plot, recruiting nephew who shares her loss and her rage, creating elaborate scheme to make CEO's death appear accidental. You're telling me this is revenge killing disguised as corporate coup? Nash felt something cold settle in his chest. Eleanor's not just trying to avoid embezzlement charges. She's trying to destroy everything Richard built because she blames Ashford Motors for killing her sister. And she's using Victoria as proxy. Kill the CEO crash. The stock let the company hemorrhage value during transition chaos, then expose the embezzlement evidence in a way that implicates Victoria as complicit, destroys her reputation, posthumously makes sure Ashford name becomes synonymous with corporate fraud and manslaughter. Marcus's expression carried the weight of someone who'd watched this unfold and done nothing. I should have pushed harder when Richard was alive. Should have gone to the board forced investigation. Instead, I convinced myself it wasn't my problem, that Richard had it handled. Now we've got attempted murder and a 12-year-old girl caught in the crossfire because I was too much of a coward to rock the boat. The self-recrimination was familiar territory. Nash heard echoes of his own guilt about Jack's brakes, about every failure that came from choosing convenience over difficult action. But recrimination was luxury they couldn't afford. Eleanor had resources, motivation, and 3 months of planning invested in Victoria's death. She'd try again, would keep trying until she succeeded or got caught, and catching her required evidence that would survive corporate legal teams and federal prosecutors. We call the police. FBI handles corporate fraud and conspiracy. We hand over everything you've compiled, let federal resources take it from here. Nash pulled out his phone, already looking up the Boston FBI field office number. This is beyond what a mechanic can investigate. Marcus's hand stopped him. Wait. If we go to FBI now with just financial records and digital trails, Eleanor lawyers up immediately. Rich people with good attorneys can delay prosecution for years. She'll claim the Peterson identity was created by someone else using her terminal. She'll produce alibis, character witnesses, 25 years of loyal service to Ashford Motors. And while legal proceedings drag on, Victoria's still in danger. Eleanor knows we're investigating. She'll accelerate her timeline, try something desperate before we can build a case that sticks. Then what do you suggest? We need physical evidence. Something that directly connects Eleanor or David to the sabotage attempts. I know where Eleanor keeps a cabin in the Berkshire's isolated property she inherited from her sister. If David's hiding anywhere, it's there. We find evidence linking him to the Peterson identity photograph. It documented. Then we hand everything to FBI with a case so airtight even expensive lawyers can't dismantle it. Nash processed the implications, confronting potentially armed suspect who'd already demonstrated willingness to commit murder, gathering evidence without legal authority or backup. Every instinct screamed that this was work for professionals. But professionals moved slowly, and slow meant Victoria remained vulnerable. I go alone. You stay here, maintain deniability. If this goes wrong, I'm just a mechanic who got in over his head. Your COO with plausible ignorance. Nash stood committed to a plan that felt increasingly reckless but increasingly necessary. "Give me the address. I'll call you when I have something." Marcus wrote coordinates on a business card. "There's a private investigator I've used before. Former FBI, specializes in evidence documentation that holds up in court. Raymond Cross. Let me call him, have him meet you there. You're not trained for this kind of work, Nash. You need someone who knows how to handle evidence collection properly." 2 hours later, Nash was driving toward Berkshire Mountains as autumn morning painted the landscape in colors that would have been beautiful if he wasn't heading toward potential confrontation with murder suspect Raymond Cross, private investigator in his 50s who still carried himself like federal law enforcement, despite years in private sector, met him at a diner in Pittsfield. They coordinated approach over coffee and strategy, agreeing that evidence documentation took priority over confrontation, that any engagement with David would be defensive rather than aggressive. "If he's there, we back off and call local police." Cross was firm on this point. "We're gathering evidence, not making citizens' arrests. I've seen too many well-intentioned civilians get hurt playing hero." The cabin sat at the end of dirt road 3 miles from nearest neighbor, 2-story structure that blended into forest like it had grown there organically, surrounded by 20 acres of woodland that provided isolation people with secrets required. No lights visible through windows, no vehicles in the gravel driveway exterior suggesting abandonment rather than active occupation. But fresh tire tracks marked the access road, and the security system panel beside the front door showed active status rather than powered down. Cross deployed electronic surveillance, first thermal imaging showing no heat signatures inside, motion sensors detecting nothing, environmental assessment suggesting empty structure rather than occupied stronghold. Still, they approached with tactical caution. Cross bypassing security panel with equipment that suggested he'd retained more FBI resources than official retirement allowed. Inside smelled like recent occupation coffee in the pot. Still slightly warm bedding on upstairs mattress, rumpled but not washed bathroom showing signs of male inhabitant who'd showered within past 24 hours. The cabin's Spartan furnishing suggested temporary refuge rather than permanent residence. Inflatable mattress, camping supplies, portable generator for power when isolation required going off-grid. But the garage converted to workshop told different story. Automotive tools covered every surface, diagnostic computers, welding equipment parts, storage that suggested someone preparing for extensive vehicle modification. Nash recognized components matching Victoria's fleet specifications, brake lines, fuel system parts, distributor caps, all the pieces of Eleanor's murder puzzle. More damning was the workbench, where someone had been practicing tampering techniques, test pieces showing progressive skill development documentation of which modifications would appear as mechanical failure rather than obvious sabotage. Cross photographed everything with methodical precision, establishing chain of custody that would survive legal challenge. Nash found documentation that completed the picture correspondence between Eleanor and David, laying out timeline for escalating sabotage, detailed observations of Victoria's schedule and vehicle usage patterns, plans showing they'd been building toward final attempt that would cause catastrophic failure with no possibility of survival. "We've got enough." Cross was already packing equipment. "This connects David directly to the Peterson identity and Eleanor to the conspiracy. FB. I can get warrants, make arrests, put this to bed properly. Time to extract and hand it over to people with badges." They were halfway to the vehicles when the helicopter appeared, corporate model, same type Victoria had used for emergency hospital transport, descending toward the cabin's clearing with the aggressive confidence of someone who owned the airspace. Through the cockpit window, Nash saw Eleanor Whitmore's face expression, carrying the particular determination of someone who'd committed too deeply to turn back now. "She knows we're here." Cross was already moving toward their car. "We need to leave. Now." But the helicopter landed between them and their escape route, rotors still spinning, door opening to reveal Eleanor and a younger man who had to be David. Both armed Eleanor with what looked like a corporate executive's idea of a threatening weapon. Small caliber handgun held with unpracticed grip. David carried himself with more confidence, military-style rifle suggesting he'd spent time learning to shoot properly. "Mr. Brennan." Eleanor's voice carried across the clearing, amplified by the kind of public speaking training that came with executive positions. "I was hoping you'd be clever enough to find this place. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down in Boston." Nash stopped walking, hands visible and empty, projecting calm he didn't feel. Cross had frozen beside him, also unarmed. Both of them caught in the open with nowhere to run and no cover except thin trees that wouldn't stop rifle rounds. "This is over, Eleanor. We've got evidence. Financial records, correspondence, the whole conspiracy documented. FBI will have warrants by end of day. You can't kill your way out of this." "Can't I?" She moved closer, gun wavering slightly, but pointed in their general direction. "You're trespassing on my property. I have every right to defend myself against intruders. 2 bodies in the woods, claim of self-defense, my attorneys arguing stand your ground laws. I'll walk away clean while you become cautionary tale about mechanics who got in over their heads." David moved to flank them, rifle steady expression, suggesting he'd made peace with whatever came next. "Aunt Eleanor, we should just leave. Go to the airport, use the jet, be in a country without extradition before FBI even knows we're gone. Killing them doesn't solve anything. It solves the problem of witnesses. It solves the problem of evidence they've already photographed and transmitted. It solves the problem of Victoria Ashford continuing to breathe when my sister is dead because Richard chose profits over safety." Eleanor's voice cracked on her sister's name, grief breaking through executive composure. "Angela died screaming in a car that Richard knew was defective. He covered it up, paid me off, expected me to take blood money and stay quiet while he built his empire on my sister's corpse." Nash understood that Payne had felt the same rage when Jack died, when he'd wondered if better maintenance or faster response or different choices would have changed the outcome. But understanding didn't mean accepting murder as solution. Your sister's death was tragedy. Richard's cover-up was wrong. But killing Victoria won't bring Angela back, won't give you closure, won't make the pain stop. It'll just add more bodies, more grief, more families destroyed by violence that solves nothing. Spoken like someone who's never lost anyone that mattered. Eleanor's laugh carried no humor. "You fix engines, Mr. Brennan. You don't understand what it's like to watch someone you love die because corporate executives decided safety recalls were too expensive, that settling lawsuits was cheaper than fixing defects. You don't get to lecture me about grief." The words hit harder than she knew. Nash thought about Margaret dying by inches from cancer, about Jack's final phone call, about spongy breaks, about Lily's failing heart, and the mathematics of transplant costs versus hourly wages. He understood grief plenty, understood how it hollowed you out and filled the space with rage, understood the temptation to make someone pay for pain that had no price. "I've lost plenty. My wife, my brother, my granddaughter's dying and I can't afford to save her. So yeah, I understand grief, understand rage, understand wanting someone to pay." Nash took a step forward, hands still visible, closing distance despite the weapons. "But I also understand that revenge doesn't heal anything, just creates new grief, new pain, new people who'll want revenge on you. It's a cycle that only ends when someone's brave enough to break it." Eleanor's gun hand trembled. "Don't come closer. Or what you'll shoot. Add murder to embezzlement and conspiracy. Prove that you're exactly what Richard thought you were, someone who could be bought off and controlled." Nash took another step. "Your sister wouldn't want this. She'd want you to live, to heal, to find a way forward that honored her memory instead of destroying yourself for revenge she never asked for. You didn't know my sister." But Eleanor's voice had lost its edge, grief breaking through anger. "No. But I know grief. Know what it does to people. Know that it makes you into someone you don't recognize until one day you wake up and realize you've become the monster you swore you'd never be." Nash was close enough now to see tears on Eleanor's face, close enough that if she pulled the trigger, he'd be dead before he hit the ground. "Is this who Angela would want you to be? Woman who murders strangers because she can't face the pain of loss?" The gun lowered fractionally. Eleanor's face crumpled, years of controlled rage collapsing into raw grief she'd been avoiding through planning and embezzling and elaborate schemes. "I just wanted someone to pay, wanted Richard to face consequences, wanted justice for Angela." Then let the law provide it. We've got evidence. Richards, cover up the defective vehicle, everything. We'll make sure Angela's death gets investigated properly. Make sure Ashford Motors faces real consequences, not just quiet settlements and NDAs. But we do it right, through courts and prosecutors and federal investigations. Not through more bodies in the woods. David lowered his rifle first, seeming to understand that the conspiracy had reached its end. Eleanor looked at her nephew, then at the gun in her hand, then at Nash, standing 3 feet away, offering something she hadn't allowed herself in 3 years, the possibility of grieving properly instead of transforming pain into violence. The gun fell from her hand. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, sobbing with the kind of desperate abandon that came from grief too long suppressed. David moved to her side, wrapped arms around his aunt, both of them crying for the sister and mother they'd lost, for the revenge that had never satisfied, for the reality that no amount of violence would bring Angela back. Cross was already on his phone calling FBI local police, coordinating the response that would transform this from potential bloodshed into actual justice. Nash stood watching Eleanor break down, feeling nothing like victory, just exhaustion and relief, and the knowledge that sometimes preventing tragedy was the best outcome available. The FBI arrived within an hour, multiple vehicles agents in tactical gear who'd apparently been staging nearby based on Cross's earlier calls. They arrested Eleanor and David with practiced efficiency. Miranda rights recited over Eleanor's quiet weeping. Cross handed over all the evidence they'd gathered, gave statements that would become foundation for federal prosecution. Victoria arrived as they were loading Eleanor into an FBI vehicle. She must have been following at distance, must have coordinated with Cross, must have been nearby when the confrontation happened. She stood watching her CFO woman, she'd trusted woman who'd tried to kill her, being driven away in handcuffs. "Is it over?" Victoria's voice barely qualified as whisper. "The conspiracy part is. FBI has evidence for embezzlement, fraud, attempted murder. Eleanor and David will face federal charges. But the part about Angela Whitmore dying in a defective Ashford vehicle, that investigation just started. You'll need to cooperate, fully expose whatever cover-up Richard implemented, face whatever consequences come from your company building unsafe cars." Victoria nodded slowly. "I know. I already called the board, told them everything. We're issuing a recall of every vehicle from that production year, establishing a victim compensation fund, cooperating completely with federal safety investigation. It'll cost us $500 million, maybe more. Stock will crater. But it's the right thing to do. Should have been done 3 years ago." They stood in the clearing watching FBI process the crime scene, watching the sun climb toward noon, watching the machinery of justice begin its slow, grinding process. Nash felt his phone buzz. Text from Lily, asking when he'd be home, reminding him about her doctor's appointment tomorrow. Casual message from a 12-year-old who didn't know her grandfather had just prevented multiple murders. "I need to get back to Boston. Lily's got medical appointments and I've been gone too long." Nash started toward his truck, feeling every minute of his 58 years in joints that hadn't stopped aching since yesterday. "Wait," Victoria caught his arm. "The investigation work. You've documented, 15 hours so far. At $300 per hour, that's $4,500. First payment toward Lily's transplant fund." Nash did the math that had been haunting him since accepting this job. Lily needed a transplant costing $650,000. Medicare would cover approximately $455,000, 70%. That left $195,000 he needed to earn. At $300 per hour, that meant 650 hours of investigation work. But the investigation had just ended. He'd earned maybe 50 hours total over 3 days. $15,000. Not nothing, but nowhere close to what Lily needed. "The job's done. Eleanor's arrested. You don't need me anymore." The words tasted like failure. "No, but I need a head of automotive safety. Someone who understands vehicles intimately, who can review every design and production process, make sure we never build another defective car that kills someone's sister." Victoria's expression carried determination mixed with something else, hope, maybe, or the beginning of rebuilding trust in her own judgment. "Salary is $200,000 annually, full benefits including executive health care that would cover Lily's transplant completely. Position starts immediately if you want it. Nash stared at her, processing an offer that solved his immediate crisis while upending his entire life. Leave his garage, leave his father's legacy, become corporate executive instead of working-class mechanic. Everything he'd sworn he'd never do. Everything Marcus had chosen that Nash had rejected. But Lily needed a transplant, needed health care that Medicare couldn't provide, needed a grandfather willing to swallow his pride and accept that sometimes survival meant compromise, meant taking jobs you never wanted because people you loved needed you to. I accept, but I keep my garage. Work there weekends, maintain it as side business, don't abandon the community that supported me for 35 years. Nash extended his hand. Deal. Victoria's grip was firm, professional, the handshake of someone sealing agreement that would change both their lives. Deal. Welcome to Ashford Motors, Nash Brennan. Try not to fix everything in the first week. Leave some problems for the rest of us to solve. They drove back to Boston separately, but Victoria followed Nash to his garage, came upstairs to the apartment where Lily waited with homework spread across the kitchen table. The little girl's face lit up, seeing them together, seeing whatever she saw in their expressions that suggested the danger had passed. Did you catch the bad people? We caught them. FBI arrested Eleanor and her nephew. They'll face trial, go to prison, justice will happen properly. Nash pulled Lily into a hug, felt her heart beating against him, irregular but fighting. And I got a new job. One that comes with health care that'll cover your transplant completely. Lily's eyes widened. You're going to be rich. I'm going to be employed by someone rich. Different thing. But yeah, we can afford the surgery now. Soon as donor heart becomes available, we're ready. Nash felt emotion closing his throat, had to pause before continuing. You're going to get your transplant, kiddo. You're going to get better. She cried, then tears of relief and joy, and the particular overwhelm of a 12-year-old who'd been brave for so long she'd forgotten what hope felt like. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching her own eyes wet, bearing witness to the moment when impossible mathematics suddenly resolved into manageable reality. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep with her new leather journal clutched to her chest, Nash and Victoria sat in his small kitchen drinking the terrible coffee she'd complained about 2 days ago, but now accepted without comment. I need to ask you something. Victoria's voice carried the particular vulnerability of someone preparing to risk rejection. When this settles down, when the federal investigation concludes and the stock stabilizes and Lily gets her transplant and life returns to something approaching normal, would you consider having dinner with me, not as your employer, just as someone who'd like to spend time with a man who's shown me that integrity still exists? Nash thought about Margaret, about the 5 years he'd spent alone, convincing himself that loving someone meant risking the pain of losing them. Thought about Lily's insistence that he needed to live instead of just survive. That isolation wasn't the same as safety. Thought about Victoria's transformation from ice queen to someone capable of crying over a 12-year-old's good news. I'd like that, but fair warning, I'm 58 years old, set in my ways, stubborn about things that don't matter. I live above a garage, I work with my hands. I measure success in satisfied customers rather than stock prices. You sure you want to sign up for that? I'm 45, emotionally unavailable, recovering from 2 years of grief I refuse to process properly. I run a company that just got exposed for building defective cars. I'm about to testify in federal investigations, and my idea of relaxation is reviewing quarterly earnings reports. Victoria smiled, real smile that reached her eyes. I think we're both disasters in our own ways. Maybe we can be disasters together. That's possibly the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. Good. I'm terrible at romance. Thought I should establish low expectations early. She stood, moved toward the door, paused with her hand on the knob. Thank you, Nash, for solving the case, for saving my life, for showing me that people can still surprise you in good ways. I'll see you Monday at corporate headquarters. Try not to terrify the executives too much with your working-class authenticity. After she left, Nash sat alone in his kitchen, with Lily's soft breathing audible from the next room, with October cold seeping through old windows, with the weight of choices made and futures altered. He pulled out his own worn notebook, the one he'd started after Margaret died, the one he'd neglected for months. 3 entries in handwriting that had deteriorated from careful precision to barely legible number 1 Lily's getting her transplant. The mathematics finally worked out. Number 2. Eleanor chose grief over revenge at the end. Sometimes people surprise you. Number 3. Victoria Ashford asked me to dinner and I said yes. Maybe I'm not too old to start over after all. He closed the notebook, set it beside Lily's new journal on the kitchen table, 2 records of attempting to find light in darkness. Outside Boston settled into night sounds, traffic diminishing, voices fading, the city exhaling after holding breath through another day of barely contained chaos. The case was closed, the conspiracy exposed. Justice would happen through courts and prosecutors instead of more violence. Lily would get her transplant. Victoria would rebuild her company with actual integrity instead of quarterly earnings as sole metric. Marcus would find redemption through cooperation with federal investigation. Eleanor would face consequences but also receive psychiatric care that might help her grieve properly, instead of transforming pain into rage. Not everyone got happy endings, but sometimes if you were lucky and stubborn and brave enough to risk connection after loss, you got something close. Got second chances. Got opportunities to start over. Got proof that broken things, hearts, lives, trust could be repaired if someone cared enough to do the work. Nash Brennan was just a mechanic. But mechanics understood that everything eventually could be fixed. You just had to be willing to try. Tomorrow he'd start his new job. Tomorrow Lily would see Dr. Wells for tests that would confirm she was stable enough to wait for donor heart. Tomorrow he'd call Victoria and plan that dinner, navigate the awkward uncertainty of dating at 58 after 5 years alone. But tonight, he just sat in his kitchen listening to his granddaughter breathe, counting his good things, believing that maybe, just maybe, the universe occasionally rewarded people who refused to give up, even when the mathematics suggested futility. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The city hummed its endless song. And in a small apartment above a garage in Boston's working-class district, a mechanic who'd just become automotive safety executive sat alone with his hope and his gratitude and his quiet certainty that tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't predict but would face anyway. Because that's what you did. You kept working. You kept trying. You kept believing that skill and effort and stubborn refusal to accept defeat would prove sufficient when love alone clearly wasn't enough. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love proved to be enough after all.